Thank you very much, John. I'm my third year now here, and I appreciate you asking me back. And just now I was looking over at the little lineup there, and I got a little intimidated. I mean, there's like doctors and PhDs and like famous people, and then you throw me in there. So, you know, it's a tough standard to hold myself up to, but I'll try to do the best I can. I want to give like a cautionary note, if that's the right thing, before we start this conference. When you mention the New World Order, people start, oh, here we go again, the nut jobs are coming out, the tinfoil hats and all this other nonsense. But there are two ends of the spectrum. You have the one end, and I'm sure any of you that are in traditional chapels, we have both of these type of people. You have the one that says, there's nothing wrong in the world. Everything's just great. We show up on Sunday to our Latin Mass, and the world is just fine. That's one group. The other group is that guy, the 40-year-old guy still living in mom's basement. He's got his walls wallpapered in tinfoil, and he can't leave the house because the Grand Master of the local lodge is going to be surveilling him. Okay, so that's the other end of the spectrum, okay? We need to look at somewhere in between. And what we need to do, and what I really encourage you, is to examine all of this through the prism of the faith, the Catholic faith. Don't go one extreme or the other. Take everything through the prism of our faith. And that's how we're going to kind of start off the conference, kind of a little bit of a review. Because if we don't look at all of the world's problems through the eyes of the faith, then we don't get the full picture. Okay? And there's plenty of guys out there that do a wonderful job exposing it, but then their solution is faulty. So what we want to do is propose the proper solution to all of these bad guys we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get started. And the last 3 years, I believe, I've began each one of these conferences with the same quote, because it's apropos. And we have to understand this, and this is a timeless quote that I'm sure 100 years from now will still be valid. If the environment you live in is not Catholic, what you erect in the morning will be torn down in the evening. This was mentioned by Cardinal Pierre of Poitiers a mere century ago. Today we are living in a time when not only is what we erect being torn down, but something very sinister is being built in its place. This something strives to eradicate our national sovereignty, destroy our families, kill our Lord Jesus Christ, and obliterate his one true religion. This something is that New World Order that we spoke of. It's an order conceived, born, and implemented from the depths of hell. The choice today is clear: the kingship of Christ and the queenship of his blessed mother, or the New World Order. Battle lines have been drawn. We are faced with a very, very dire situation. The kingdom of Christ or the kingdom of Satan. Now, it's imperative that we know our enemy and their plans. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do today by exposing the Pied Pipers of the New World Order. But before we get to that point, we need to know what we are fighting for. And what we are fighting for is the social reign of Christ the King. Now let's take a brief moment to go over what that is again. It's always good to review it so that we understand and know what that, what our rallying cry is. We look to the writings of Father Fahey. We look to the papal encyclicals for the divine plan for order. And once we understand the divine plan for order, as given to us by the Church, the plans of the Pied Pipers of the New World Order become readily crystal clear to us. So let's start with the six-point plan for divine order. We're going to go through it real briefly. And I suggest, if I could command you, but I suggest that you pick up some books on the social teachings of the Church, specifically Father Fahey, and all of the papal encyclicals on the social teachings. Very, very important that we understand that. But there's 6 points to the divine plan for order. First being church and state relations. Now, this is always, especially in this country, this is always a very difficult concept for people to get their head around. But the Catholic concept, the Catholic teaching is this: The state must recognize the Catholic Church as the one true church, the only path to salvation, and as such must provide it official protection. The state cannot legislate sin, and it cannot promote anything contrary to the Catholic faith. Now again, this is not something that's unique to our country now. This is, the separation of church and state is now, is all over the world. It is a error that has spread all over the world. So that's the first one, that harmonious bond between church and state. The second point is the indirect power of the church. And what that is the power that lies in the hands of the Pope and the bishops to intervene in temporal affairs when the salvation of souls are at stake. Now, sadly today, either our bishops don't know that they have this power, or they're unwilling to exercise it. I think it's probably the second one rather than the first. But that's the indirect power of the church. The third, indissolubility of Christian marriage. Man and woman come together, have children. The family is the building block of society. When you start tearing apart the marriage bond, you start breaking down the family, and society begins to crumble. The fourth point is very, very important. One of the most important, if not the important, is the Christian education of youth. If anyone remembers the talk from last year, we talked about the public education system. It's nothing more than they are nothing more than indoctrination centers. The popes found it necessary to continue to talk throughout history about how important educating our children in a Catholic manner is. And as you're going to see as we go through this conference, those opposed to the church understand this just as well, and they're using the public school system to indoctrinate our children to become good little soldiers in the New World Order. It sounds very dramatic, but that's exactly what's happening. And then the last 2 points of divine plan for order have to do with economics, a wide diffusion of private property and a monetary system. This creates an economic state which man can receive the fruits of his labor. Money is at the service of mankind in his production. Money is not an end in and of itself. Money is to facilitate the production and exchange of material goods so that man can live in a virtuous situation, a virtuous life where he and the greatest amount of people can obtain salvation. So that's the divine plan for order in a nutshell. It's pretty comprehensive. It's pretty simple to understand. The flip side of this, if you read any of Father Fahey's works, is Satan's plan for disorder, and he describes that in his books. And that's exactly what the New World Order is, Satan's plan for disorder. It's going to be, when it finally comes to fruition, and we're in the process of getting there, a total and complete atheistic dictatorship where church and state are separated, obviously. The church is inconsequential if it even exists anymore, in their mind. Divorce, contraception, abortion, and population control will be how some of the central planning of governments to control the populations, central banks, inflation, usury, and a world currency, and then public education. So as you see, we're in that mode. We're getting there, if not there already. We see all over the world regional governments popping up. European Union, African Union, the League of Arab States, and then here in North America, the push for a North American Union. There's currently a movement toward the global currency. Our current Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, actually came out and said that he'd be open to having a global currency. Gordon Brown, Prime Minister of England, is calling for a global constitution. And then you have the environmental movement, which is the substitute religion for the one world government of the New World Order. And some of the most powerful men in the world are behind this environmental movement, the radical environmentalists. Gorbachev, Al Gore, Maurice Strong, they're all pushing this radical environmentalism. So as you can see, it's a very organized, detailed movement. But what's driving this? Who's behind it? Well, the whole New World Order apparatus is driven by secret and semi-secret societies. And we're going to go over some of them. But within these secret societies, semi-secret some of them, are the global elites. And it's very important, again, like I said in the beginning, have a balanced approach to researching this. But look, I'm going to name you some of these groups. Look them up when you get home and kind of look at what they believe and what they stand for and what they've done throughout history. But let me list a couple of them for you. The Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, Skull and Bones, Freemasonry, Bohemian Grove, the Group of 30, the Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. And there are more, but these are probably the most popular ones. What you have to understand is that these groups are populated by the most powerful individuals in the world. And there is no doubt that these individuals and these groups are shaping the policies and direction of our world. But before we start getting into the exposing them, I want to make it clear as to what the church has said about these type of societies. And the next quote I'm going to read to you from Leo XII is probably the best definition of the New World Order that I could come up with. This is what Leo XII said. Secret societies have exposed their contempt for authority, their hatred of sovereignty, their attacks against the divinity, and the very existence of God. They openly vaunt their materialism as well as their codes and statutes, which explain their plans and efforts in order to overthrow the legitimate heads of state and completely destroy the church. If you take nothing else out of this conference, that's the New World Order. That's what it is right there. Pius VIII in 1829 said this to the world's bishops. He wants the world's bishops to eradicate those secret societies of factious men who, completely opposed to God and to princes, are wholly dedicated to bringing about the fall of the church, the destruction of kingdoms, and disorder in the whole world. Could the popes be any clearer? Absolutely crystal clear. Now, the men who populate these secret societies, these elitist organizations, are by their very membership anti-Catholic and are enemies of our Lord's divine kingship. Now, before we again get into the individuals, let's take a brief look at three of these groups that we talked about. The Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Let's start with the Bilderberg group. This group began in the early 1950s, and it gathers together leaders from the world of politics, media, business, and finance. They meet once a year in different locations. For many years it was secret. Now there's a number of different journalists who've exposed where they're meeting, but the meetings themselves are still secret. Now, the initial purpose of this group, according to the group, was to foster a better understanding between the cultures of the United States and Western Europe. However, this benign-sounding purpose is far from the real intent of the Bilderbergers. Their real designs are much more nefarious. An author by the name of Daniel Estelin, an expert on the inner workings of this group, stated in his book, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, they are planning for the world's future, mainly a one-world government with a single global marketplace, policed by a one-world army, and financially regulated by a one-world bank using one global currency. It's an excellent book to get a real flavor as to what this group is all about. So you understand now, briefly, what the plans of the Bilderbergers are. You say to yourself, well, that's great. That's just some, real rich people meeting in a nice hotel and they talk about politics. Well, let's look at some of the American attendees over the last 5 decades at the Bilderberg Conference. Secretaries of State, Dean Rusk, George Shultz, Cyrus Vance, Henry Kissinger, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice. Treasury Secretaries, Lloyd Benson, Lawrence Summers, Hank Paulson, Timothy Geithner. National Security Advisors, McGeorge Bundy, Brent Scowcroft, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and Sandy Berger. Vice Presidents Walter Mondale, Dan Quayle, and Nelson Rockefeller. Secretaries of Defense, Richard Pearl, William Perry, Donald Rumsfeld. From media, Ted Turner and Steven Spielberg. From business and industry, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, and John Corzine, Goldman Sachs. Presidents Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford were also attendees at one point in time. And of course, David Rockefeller, who attends all of these type of meetings. But did anyone kind of catch the common thread here? Does it matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat? Does it make any difference? You see, right? You see that this cuts across party lines. They're all attending these meetings. So that's the Bilderbergers. And really, I mean, we could spend a whole conference on them, but please take some time and do a little bit of research on them. So the second group is the Trilateral Commission. This was established to foster a closer relationship between North America, Europe, and Japan, and this was formed in 1973. Senator Barry Goldwater had this to say about the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission is international and intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. In other words, the Trilateral Commission, much like the Bilderbergers, are one-worlders in search of a world government, a world monetary system, and everything that goes along with it. Let's look at some of the American members of the Trilateral Commission. And I'm just going to give you a few, but you'll start getting the flavor of these guys. Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Dick Cheney, President Bush Sr., President Jimmy Carter, Federal Reserve Chairmen Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker, Paul Wolfowitz, Senator Dianne Feinstein, and of course, David Rockefeller. So that's a Trilateral Commission. Kind of see the same people in both groups? Let's get to the Council on Foreign Relations, and then we'll start getting into some specifics. This was founded in 1921 to promote an understanding of American foreign policy, a foreign policy think tank, so to speak. In essence, what it really is another pro-globalist organization which seeks to implement world government and a world economic order. Now, the CFR is considered by many to be the shadow government of the United States. And let's look at some of the members of the Council on Foreign Relations. David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, George Bush Sr., Dick Cheney, Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker. Now, in the Council on Foreign Relations, there are also corporate members. Here's some of the corporate members in this group: ABC News, Bank of America, Citigroup, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Hess, Goldman Sachs, Verizon, JP Morgan Chase, Sony, MasterCard, Time Warner, and Merrill Lynch. I will submit to you that these three organizations are controlling each and every facet of the world's politics and the world's economies. They are planning, as we said before, a world government, a world currency, a world army, and a new world order. These power elites are laying the foundation for the rise of the Antichrist. And ladies and gentlemen, our beloved country is firmly in the grasp of these organizations and has been for many years. Now again, I'm going to give you an example to illustrate this, and please understand, when we talk about this country, we love this country. It's the land of our birth. But we don't accept the anti-Catholic principles that we're living under today. So that's a distinction that has to be made, that you're not anti-American. You're pro-American because you want what's best for your country, and that's for your country to be under the reign of Christ the King. So let's now look at the influence that these three organizations have had in our government and in our country. And I'm going to go back 6 presidential administrations. I'm going to start with Reagan all the way down to our present administration. And I'm going to read you the numbers of either Bilderberger, Trilateral Commission members, or CFR members, or a combination of the three. Some people are in all three organizations. Let's start with the Reagan administration. 5 members of the National Security Council were one of the members in one of these groups. 6 cabinet members, 21 members of the State Department, and 24 ambassadors. In Carter's administration, the entire National Security Council, 6 cabinet members, 27 State Department members, and 26 ambassadors. In Bush Sr.'s administration, 4 National Security Council members, 5 cabinet members, 19 State Department members, and 19 ambassadors. In Clinton's administration, 3 National Security Council members, 6 cabinet members, 17 State Department, and 9 ambassadors. And in Bush the Younger, 12 National Security Council members, 5 cabinet members, 34 State Department members, and 38 ambassadors. President Obama. Of Obama's 14 top cabinet positions, 9 are affiliated with the Bilderbergers, 10 with the Council on Foreign Relations, relations, and 5 with the Trilateral Commission. Are we yet convinced that the game is rigged? Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. These people are in control. Each election cycle, they provide us with choices. But the choices will always further their agenda. Our political process is bought and paid for. It has been co-opted by those who are in direct opposition to the social reign of Christ the King. The rule of thumb here is this: the game remains the same, only the players on the field change. The game is the same. And I want to give you one more example. If that didn't convince you, I'm going to give you one more example to convince you now that these organizations hold sway over our political process in this country. And we'll take Zbigniew Brzezinski, member of the Bilderberger Group, Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. A self-avowed Marxist, he was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Okay? Democrat Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Right? Stay with me here. In 2000, Brzezinski was Republican Senator John McCain's foreign policy advisor when he ran in the primary against President Bush. Okay? In 2008, Zbigniew Brzezinski was the foreign policy advisor for Democrat Barack Obama's presidential campaign against Senator John McCain. He was assisted by his son, Mark Brzezinski. Okay? Now, anyone can guess who John McCain's foreign policy advisor was during the 2008 presidential election against Barack Obama? Ian Brzezinski, Zbignew's other son. So the control of our political process is complete. The global elites are directing the policies, the participants, and the plan. And ladies and gentlemen, the plan is not the divine plan for order. So let's review what we've gone through so far. We briefly reviewed the 6-point plan for divine order and compared it to the New World Order. We looked at the Church's prohibition of secret societies and those groups, Bilderberger, Trilateral Commission, and Council on Foreign Relations, that are the world's puppet masters. We also took a quick look at how the American political process has been co-opted by these groups. Now that the foundation has been laid, let's spend some time on the scoundrels who comprise these groups. There are so many of them to choose from. We're just going to focus on a few. I mean, you just go on. We could go on and on with the different guys, and maybe next year I can do 3 more if John has me back again. But the main 3, and what I call them the unholy trinity of the New World Order, are Brzezinski, Kissinger, and Rockefeller. And to a lesser extent, although I can't say that they're of lesser importance, but for the purposes of this conference, the other 2 I want to look at is Mikhail Gorbachev and George Soros. So let's start with Brzezinski. What's interesting about this, too, and I don't know what the significance of it is, but as you just keep in mind and listen as I go through this, where these men were educated, very, very interesting. So Brzezinski, born in Poland in 1928, was educated in Canada at McGill University and ultimately received a PhD from Harvard. He was an advisor to JFK in 1960, LBJ in 1964, and Hubert Humphrey in 1968. In 1973, he helped form the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller. He served as director of the Trilateral Commission from 1973 to 1976. He helped discover Jimmy Carter and get him elected, and served as his national security advisor. In 1985, he served as a member of Reagan's Chemical Warfare Commission. In 1988, he endorsed Bush 1 for president. In 2000, he served as McCain's foreign policy advisor. 2008, Barack Obama's foreign policy advisor. He is currently a professor of foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University. He previously served in the faculty of Harvard from 1953 to 1960 and Columbia University from 1960 to 1989. So just ponder for a second how many students went to these universities and were infected by the ideology of this man. So you're talking somewhere around 40 years worth of instructing in these very prestigious universities. So that's Brzezinski. Let's look at Rockefeller. He was born in New York City in 1915. Youngest son of John D. Rockefeller, received a Bachelor of Science from Harvard, a master's from Harvard, and a doctorate from the University of Chicago. In 1946, he joined the staff of Chase Bank and eventually rose to the chairman of the board and CEO. In 1973, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski, he formed the Trilateral Commission. He is a member of both the Bilderberger Group and the Council on Foreign Relations, and he is the leading advocate in the world, along with a couple of others, of population control. And we'll get to that in detail. So that's Rockefeller. Kissinger. Kissinger was born in Germany in 1923, served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under Presidents Nixon and Ford, received his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate from Harvard, was appointed by President Bush to head the 9/11 Commission, but later resigned over potential conflict of interest with his company Kissinger Associates. Just to go off track here real quick, Timothy Geithner, our current Treasury Secretary, also worked for Kissinger Associates. And if you start looking at where these gentlemen worked, who they associated with, it's a very tight network. They worked for these high-level individuals, and then all of a sudden you see them placed in cabinet positions throughout the government. So anyway, he resigned from the 9/11 Commission. And he is still today a dominant player in U.S. foreign policy and is considered a kingmaker of presidential candidates, and specifically Republican presidential candidates. If anybody remembers, I think Herman Cain this year, he had to have a meeting with Kissinger. Sarah Palin, back 4 years ago, she had a very publicized meeting with Henry Kissinger. So he's a kingmaker in the presidential candidate arena. Gorbachev, born in Russia in 1931, studied law at Moscow University, eventually ascended the ladder of the Communist Party. In 1985, he was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990, currently heads the Gorbachev Foundation, Green Cross International, and the Civic Forum movement. He is the guru of the environmental movement. And finally, George Soros. Born in Hungary in 1930, 1956, he moved to New York City, began working on Wall Street, and amassed his fortune there. Made his first $1 billion by manipulating the British pound. He was a disciple of a gentleman by the name of Karl Popper, a fellow atheist and the father of the Open Society. He's a proponent of world government, population control, and euthanasia. He's a very, very strong backer of President Obama, but he's also financially involved with the Bush and Cheney families through the Carlyle Group and Halliburton. So again, we see there's this party, it's almost to the point of being party nonsense. They're all together with each other. So these are few of the power elite. Other heavyweights such as Bill Gates, Ted Turner, Warren Buffett, and Maurice Strong are equally culpable in the march toward a new world order and the advent of the Antichrist. These men view the world as their playground. They think nothing of enacting policies that kill millions, literally millions of people, to accomplish their geopolitical goals. Let's take a look. Let's go to the 1980s when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. That's what people think happened. They invaded without provocation with overwhelming force. America then came to the rescue by arming the rebels, the Mujahideen, and they drove the Soviets out of Afghanistan. The truth, however, is a bit different than the official account. In 1979, a program was instituted by National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski to fund and arm the opponents of Afghanistan's pro-Soviet regime. Brzezinski knew that this would push the Soviets to intervene in Afghanistan. He told President Carter, after he signed the directive to aid the rebels, that we now have the opportunity to give Russia, the USSR, its Vietnam War. This conflict killed at least 15,000 Russians and over 1 million Afghanis. Now, the result of this conflict was that the freedom fighters that Brzezinski and the Carter administration backed, financed, and trained became our modern-day boogeymen, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Brzezinski had this to say about the operation in a 1998 interview. That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap, and you want me to regret it? What is more important to the history of the world, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire, some stirred-up Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War? You see, Brzezinski wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard. In his mind, you have to understand the mind of these men, you and I are pawns on a chessboard. So to create some type of conflict where tens of thousands of people lose their lives, to them it's just part of doing business. It's the cost of doing business. Let's get back to Brzezinski. He did almost the same thing in Cambodia after Vietnam invaded Cambodia in 1979. After the invasion, Brzezinski encouraged the Chinese to support the genocidal communist Pol Pot, who slaughtered at least 2 million people. And this is what he had to say about his involvement in Cambodia. I quote, "I encourage the Chinese to support Pol Pot. I encourage the Thais to help the Khmer Rouge. The question was how to help the Cambodian people. Pol Pot was an abomination. We could never support him, but China did." So again, you see the whole chessboard, the whole idea of pawns. People are pawns. Brzezinski was also instrumental in the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and the support of the Ayatollah Khomeini. People in these men's minds are mere pawns to be used indiscriminately to further their geopolitical objectives. Brzezinski did, and he continues to do his part. Let's move on to Henry Kissinger. In 1968, and this is not any type of secret information, 1968, Kissinger intentionally sabotaged the peace talks with Vietnam, and what happened was the war ended up continuing 4 more years, causing numerous deaths. Kissinger, as Nixon's national security advisor, suggested, promoted, pushed, and was the architect of the secret bombing campaign of Cambodia that carpet-bombed the nation for 14 months, resulting in at least 600,000 deaths. The result of this campaign so enraged the Cambodian peasants that many of them went to the Khmer Rouge. Kissinger organized the overthrow and assassination of Chilean President Salvador Allende and the subsequent military coup. In 1973, Kissinger supported and gave U.S. approval to Indonesia's invasion of Catholic East Timor. 60,000 Timorese were slaughtered by U.S.-made weapons provided to Indonesia by Kissinger. Now, Kissinger and Brzezinski's Bilderberg comrade, David Rockefeller, also aided and financed numerous military actions. In 1973, Rockefeller was involved with Kissinger in the Chilean Revolution. The Rockefeller family helped fund Hitler. Okay? He helped the Rockefeller banking family helped to fund Adolf Hitler. And the banking conglomerates controlled by the Rockefellers have profited from bankrolling both sides of most of our modern wars. The future will bring more planned wars and revolutions used to further the agenda of the New World Order. But before these men go any further, they should heed the warnings of Pius XII. And I quote the Holy Father, "May the heavenly light illuminate the minds of those who have in their hands the destinies of people. May they realize that just as peace is the work of wisdom and justice, so war is the fruit of blindness and hatred. Let them consider that one day they must render account not only to history, but to God's eternal judgment." That's a sobering thought for these men who have created all kinds of unrest all over the world and clearly are responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And not only are they responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people through these wars and revolutions, they're planning the deaths of millions more. And they're doing it through their diabolical population control policies. The Pied Pipers of the New World Order are obsessed with population control. And David Rockefeller and his family and his family's foundation is leading the charge. The Rockefeller Foundation was founded in 1913, and its offshoots, the Population Council and the Rockefeller Brothers Foundations, came years later. Since their founding, these foundations have bankrolled Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, the Nazi eugenics program, the producers of the abortion pill RU-486, and sex researcher Alfred Kinsey, among others. In 1969, Vice President of Planned Parenthood World Population Frederick Jaffe sent a memo to Bernard Burleson of the Rockefeller's Population Council entitled "Activities Relevant to the Study of Population Policy for the United States." And I have a copy of it here. You can get it online. and it talks about examples of proposed measures to reduce U.S. fertility. Now, I'm going to just read you off, and anybody wants to look at it after the conference, I have it here available. Some of the initiatives they wanted to put forth to reduce population. Restructure the family, postpone or avoid marriage, alter image of ideal family size, compulsory education of children. How did that get in there? You see how important these people think, what they think of education, how absolutely essential it is to further their plans? Encourage increased homosexuality. Educate for family limitation. Encourage women to work. And here's one I found, and I don't have any research on this, but put fertility control agents in the water supply. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I haven't done enough research on it. But the mere fact that they would think of doing it is enough to give anyone a pause. Here's some more. Compulsory abortion of out-of-wedlock pregnancies. Compulsory sterilization of all who have 2 children. Sounds like what country? China. And you'll see how much these guys love China a little later on. Payment to encourage sterilization. Payments to encourage contraception. Payments to encourage abortion. Abortion and sterilization on demand. 1969. Most of this stuff is already in place today. Rockefeller was also involved between 1963 and 1965 in Colombia with a sterilization program that ended up sterilizing 400,000 Colombian women. And here's what David Rockefeller had to say about population control. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems, don't they sound so professional when they come up with these things, is becoming appallingly evident. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population. Now, he doesn't give any real numbers, but the other guys do, and we'll get to that in a minute. So let's move on to Kissinger. In 1974, Henry Kissinger completed a classified study entitled National Security Memorandum 200, Implications of a Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests. Now, I actually read this thing. It's really boring, but it's very dangerous. It's been declassified, but this was actual policy of the government back in the 70s. This document claims that increased population in a number of lesser developed countries poses a national security risk to the United States. It specifically targeted 13 countries, warning that population growth in these countries would increase their political, economic, and military strength. This was adopted as official government policy in 1975, and it outlined a detailed, covert plan to reduce world population. The document calls for an increased use of birth control and calls for financial incentives to those countries that implement aggressive sterilization, abortion, and family planning programs. The document also states that those countries who refuse to implement these programs will be deprived of financial aid. Now, you have to kind of read through the lines with all the verbiage, but that's exactly what the document says. See, the document is very clear as you go further as to why these programs should be implemented. This should scare everybody as to why these gentlemen want to implement these programs. And listen, here, this is quoted directly from Kissinger's document. The U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. That fact gives the U.S. enhanced interest in the political, economic, and social stability of the supplying countries. World population needs to be decreased by 50%. Depopulation should be the highest priority of foreign policy towards the third world. Why? And I quote, because the U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. Wow, 50%. So we need more natural resources, so we'll just limit the population in all these other countries and we can take the natural resources. These guys are great, aren't they? I mean, it just keeps getting better. Now, Brzezinski, who as Carter's National Security Advisor helped implement Kissinger's National Security Memorandum 200, had this to say in 2008. It's easier to kill 1 million people than to control them. Bill Gates, this is just recently said. Now, I want you to listen to this quote, and I'll say it slowly, but think through this quote as I give it to you. Bill Gates, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's heading up to about 9 billion. Okay, here comes the kicker. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by 10 to 15%. So, wait a minute. Good health care and good vaccines, and we're killing people? Is that what Bill Gates is telling us? Billions upon billions of dollars he's pumping into Africa. They're looking to reduce the population, not by 50%, but by much more. Let's go to my next buddy here, Ted Turner. Ted Turner said this: a total population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. Gorbachev, cut the population by 90%, and there aren't enough people left to do a great deal of ecological damage. Now, you know, every child, every kid, boy, has this fantasy of hitting a home run to win the World Series or scoring a touchdown to win the Super Bowl. But I have a fantasy here. And I want to be in a room with these guys, and I want to say, you know what, I agree with your policies. Which one of you are the first ones that are going to pull the plug on yourself? See how quick their mind changes. But see, their idea is they stay, you go. That's exactly what they have planned. They're not the only ones, though. Soros, Warren Buffett, Michael Bloomberg, mayor of New York City, and Oprah Winfrey, believe it or not, Oprah Winfrey, are using their influence and immense fortunes to fund and support population control programs. Do you think the Pied Pipers and their cohorts want to depopulate the world? You better believe it, because if you don't, you haven't been listening to what they've said. Now, this leads us into the next section. How do they propose to accomplish these goals? That's simple, through a world government. A world government that will control every aspect of our lives and attempt to eradicate Christ and his church from the face of the earth. Let's listen to these men themselves as they tell us about the coming world government. Brzezinski. This regionalization is in keeping with the trilateral plan, which calls for a gradual convergence of East and West, ultimately leading toward the goal of a one world government. National sovereignty is no longer a viable concept. David Rockefeller. The world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an international elite, of who Rockefeller feels he's part of, and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. George Soros, he gets right to the point. America should be replaced by a world government with a global currency under UN rule. Henry Kissinger in 1991 at a Bilderberg conference. I quote, "Today America would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow they will be grateful. This would especially be true if they were told that there were an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will plead to deliver them from this evil. The one thing that man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by a world government." Is there any doubt that this is what these men want? And what ideology will drive this world government? Will it be the social reign of Christ the King or something else? Well, let's let the Pied Pipers tell us what's going to be the driving force behind this coming world government. Start with Brzezinski again. I like him. I like to say his name, so we'll start with him again. Wrote a book, Between Two Ages. Now, again, when these guys write books, it's not like a 200-page, it's like a 700-page book. And to wade through, I don't know if they do this by design, but to wade through to get really to what they're trying to tell you, it's next to impossible. But he said this in his book, Between Two Ages. Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Marxism is simultaneously a victory of the external, active man over the inner, passive man, and a victory of reason over belief. David Rockefeller. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Are you kidding me? That's what they believe. That's the ideology that they subscribe to. Mikhail Gorbachev. I am a communist, a convinced communist. For some that may be a fantasy, but to me it is my main goal. And Henry Kissinger showed his solidarity with communism by attending the 2011 Red Song Gala as a guest of the Chinese government. This celebration was to glorify communism and the Communist Party. Is communism dead? Our Lady told us it's not. Has Russia been consecrated? No. Don't believe the lie that communism is dead. The coming world government will be defined by this Marxist ideology. This is the ideology that Pope Leo XIII defined as the fatal plague which insinuates itself into the very marrow of human society only to bring about its ruin. And that is exactly what the Pied Pipers of the New World Order are aiming at, bringing about the ruin of human society. And from these ruins will rise a world government based on Marxist principles. This world government will use war and revolution to achieve its geopolitical goals. This world government will use Nazi-like eugenics programs to control population and eliminate any opposition. This world government will be awash in blood and millions will die. This world government will prepare for the coming of the Antichrist. The situation is bleak, yes, and sadly, many traditional Catholics, and we know them, we all know them, are asleep at the wheel. The traditional Catholic movement has become, in a certain way, complacent. How many of us, and again, when I say us, collectively, the whole movement, how many of us attend the Tridentine Mass on Sunday, then subscribe to some degree or another to the principles of the New World Order on Monday? How many Catholics today put their hope in a political party? They think the answers lie with Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and Bill O'Reilly. They look at the altar on Sunday, but to the politicians on Monday, the same politicians who are controlled by the Pied Pipers of the New World Order. Ladies and gentlemen, the New World Order has filled the void that it itself has created with the dethronement of Christ the King. When man places himself above God, all of the dreams of the Pied Pipers become reality. And when man places himself above God, as the Pied Pipers have, then whether they admit it or not, they worship Satan. For in the words of Archbishop Lefebvre, where Christ does not reign, Satan takes the throne. Clearly our Lord's throne is occupied by the prince of this world. But do not despair, for the gates of hell shall not prevail against our Lord's church. Rather, accept and propagate the Catholic faith in its entirety. Start first and foremost with the interior life. Sanctify yourself and your family. Frequent reception of the sacraments are paramount. Pray the rosary daily, wear the brown scapular, enthrone your home to the Sacred Heart, and study your faith, and especially study the social teachings of the Church. From this we must strive to re-Catholicize our country and our world through the understanding and implementation of the social kingship of Christ. It is through this most beautiful doctrine that our country and our world will be saved. While we must suffer for now through a godless society, brought upon us by the Pied Pipers of the New World Order, it does not mean that we cease to strive for a Catholic America. And one way to help accomplish the Catholicizing of America is the support of traditional Catholic education. The traditional schools of the SSPX, the Dominicans, and others are incubators for future vocations. These schools are where Catholic statesmen, Catholic military leaders, Catholic doctors, nurses, lawyers, businessmen, teachers, and parents are formed. These schools are the great hope for the future. The products of these schools will form the army of Christ the King that will stand on the front lines of the battle against the New World Order and ultimately the Antichrist. Support traditional Catholic education with all that you have. The future depends on it. If one day you hope to have a president like Garcia Moreno, support Catholic education. If you want a president like we have now or what we have coming down the road, then continue to go as we were. Ladies and gentlemen, we as Catholics are not permitted to retire from the fight for the reign of Christ the King. Whether or not God in his infinite wisdom gives us the honor and privilege to live in a Catholic state is irrelevant. Our solemn duty for which we all will be judged is not whether we live in a Catholic state, but rather did we fight with all of our strength and even our very life to bring one about. The Pied Pipers are working to pave the way for the Antichrist. We must all ask ourselves, what are we doing to pave the way for the social reign of Christ the King? Turn then to our Blessed Mother who stands ready to crush the head of the New World Order. Turn to her who loves us so much. Turn to her and beg her to intercede on behalf of our sick and twisted world. Turn to her so that we will one day realize the triumph of her Immaculate Heart and the reign of her Divine Son. It is high time we cease hearing of the New World Order and the glory of man and start attending to the rights and glory of God. And use the words of Pius X to rally you, all of us, in this battle. The interests of God shall be our interests, and for these we are resolved to spend all our strength and our very life. Hence, should anyone ask us for a symbol as to the expression of our will, we will give this and no other, to renew all things in Christ. Viva Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King. Thank you.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it. Our Lady said, "If my requests are not heeded, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer, and various nations will be annihilated."